So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. We're very excited to have a guest with us who has some amazing research, doing some very fascinating work. And so I want to introduce him and get us rolling. Before I do, I want to remind those of you who are joining us that we will have a Q&A, as is typical of the Center for Humanities Colloquia. We'll be using the chat function of Zoom in order to do the Q&A. So once our presenter has spoken and given us his presentation, we'll be asking you to send questions through the chat function. And then we'll be moderating those in order to have our guests to respond to your questions as time allows. So thank you for joining us again. Today we're delighted to have with us Dr. Vineet Kapoor. Dr. Vineet Kapoor, he is a visiting research scholar and a visiting professor at the University of Virginia's Corruption Lab on Ethics, Accountability, and the Rule of Law. It's also known as the CLEAR Lab. Dr. Kapoor is a member of the Indian Police Service who has worked in various police jurisdictions in India and with the United Nations Department for Peacekeeping Operations. Dr. Kapoor has expertise in police reforms and human rights, in police training and law enforcement, and related areas of research. He earned his PhD in human rights and its relationship with police education and organizational development. We're very delighted to welcome him today. He's going to speak to us about the research that he's been conducting and its implications for understanding the relationship between religion and human rights and law enforcement. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Vineet Kapoor. If we were all in the same room, you would be able to hear everyone clapping for you right now, but we are on Zoom, so you can see some heads nodding, and those who've turned off their video, I'm sure they're very excited. So we'll get started. So thank you very much again for being here.
Thank you very much, Sylvester, and thanks to Sylvester and the Humanities Department of Virginia Tech for inviting me in for this talk. And I'm really, really very happy to share my views today. I would like to acknowledge that one of my very esteemed colleagues from India, Maya Daruwala, who's a very big name in human rights defense and human rights movement in India. She's joined today, and she has a lifelong career in mainstreaming human rights in police. So I'm very happy that she's here. Thanks for joining and taking time. Thanks all of you for this particular talk. And it's a nice initiative by Sylvester and Virginia Tech to incorporate such a Zoom talk in these times of trouble. So without wasting much time on any other formalities, I think I'll start with my presentation, and I'll just try to put it in full screen. But before that, I like to mention that this topic is related to law enforcement through diversity embedded multicultural community policing, finding solutions for faith-based conflicts. So this particular presentation, or the research which I am trying to do on this aspect, is based on my 25 years of police practice, which has enabled me to understand different aspects of community life and law enforcement and rights realization and intersectionality in the communities and how the governance is done. And this has informed me with some ideas as to how community policing could be analyzed from a intersectionality perspective, from a diversity perspective, and how in the real action of things can we embed culturally sensitive policing. I know there are a lot of issues in my own country where there are problems between different communities, and we come to hear a lot of news regarding conflicts and bad handling of the conflict by the police. And and I don't deny that things are happening this way also. But it's a huge country, and there are many different aspects of enforcing the law and cultures and traditions of policing. I belong to a state in which relatively better conditions exist in multicultural community policing. Madhya Pradesh is one of the first states in the country to have formalized community policing through a law, through an act in 1999, which is called Nagar Evam Gram Raksha Samiti Adhiniyam, which is an act which enshrines community principles, community policing principles in policing practice. So my own practice and my colleagues' practice I have been observing since past 25 years, and that informs this particular presentation. So because I have based this presentation from my listeners and audience from the US perspective, I like to first give a flavor of the canvas on which we play. So the prelude is the diversity. It's a huge country of 1.3 billion people, and that's why the diversity is huge. And this diversity, to comprehend this diversity, it's a huge and challenging task. The diversity is related to, like, my today's topic of religion and culture. The culture is multicultural in many aspects. Religion is one of the major aspects of the multicultural community and individual identities. You can see, like, uh, four major religions and the huge congregations of each religion happening. Uh, why I am emphasizing on the congregation part of it, by the multitude of people attending religious ceremonies and rituals, is because it is the mass movement of people and congregations which come to the police to handle, because to prevent stampedes, to prevent clashes in among the group, and to enable the religious groups to exercise their freedom of worship and freedom of practicing their own religion in their own manner freely. There is a lot of effort done by the facilitating role of police. And this is how I call this diversity respecting and multicultural policing endeavors. So there are a lot of intersections on which this society depends. These intersections are primarily class-based. Poverty and inequality define the economy of the country, and huge number of poor people live in the country, and they intersect across all other intersections of life. The other one is the caste. The caste is by birth, and the four major castes in the majority religion of Hinduism define the status of the people. Although after the new constitution came up and past 70, 80 years, lot of uh, uh, water has flown under the bridge. Lot of eh, problems have ironed out, but lot of problems exist. So the economy affects the intersections through class and poverty, and the history affects through caste and inequality. Religion is the cultural expression of the people. It is deeply embedded in in the everyday life existence in the country. Religion is the basic source of identity of most of the people, and it is very close to their emotional and their physical life. And that's why it informs, and it is informed through the history. The, and the culture, the history, and its expression in religion is served by politics also. So that makes it the intersections more complex than language. Language is again a cultural expression. It is expressed through the geography of the country. It's a huge country, seventh largest country in the world from the point of view of area, and second largest country from the point of view of population. So it's a huge country with lot of linguistic diversity, with 28 national languages and 300 dialects which have been recognized as having independent existence. So it's a huge source of cultural diversity. Regional diversity. The regional diversity is also huge. The southern states, the northeastern states, the northern states, the western states all have different cultural expressions in language, in art, music, and in everyday life, in food and other habits. Gender is a very, very established intersection which runs through everything, and it runs through, I don't need to repeat much because it is across the world: gender, society, religion, class, culture, caste, history, politics. Everywhere the gender intersects. Urban and rural. The urban and rural differences in the population also have a lot of impact on differences in the expressions of life and the expressions of culture. Education, again, economy led. Education and is class defined, and that also divides the people, because there are a huge number of uneducated people. Like, for example, a lot of women remain uneducated throughout life, and like situations are changing very fast. But the things that these intersections do exist in the society. And then individual identity versus communal identity. So you have individual, then family, then community. So sometimes there is a trade-off from the individual to the community. So the community and the family life might trump individual identity, and so this intersection is also very important. So across all these intersections, the society exists. Now, a major countering factor to the whole intersection is the Indian Constitution and its very liberal nature of the Constitution, which is highly human rights embedded in its character. Uh, primary context of this intersection cutting across the society is are these rights: right to equality before law, against discrimination, caste, uh, race, birth, sex, religion. And there is a strong movement of anti-discrimination and affirmative action. Right to life and personal liberty, freedom of expression, speech, and freedom to criticize government, right to freedom of religion, worship, religious affairs, religious practices, and religious education. All have been separately defined and very well enshrined in the Constitution and in the legal order also. Cultural and educational right, with protection of the minorities and protection of constitutional right and constitutional remedies. The list is very long. I've just tried to average it to give you a flavor of what exists. In the nutshell, within the intersections of society, there is a counter of citizen rights, constitutional rights, fundamental rights, human rights, and they're all underscored by the state practice. And it informs the state practice. Ideally, it must all be 100% used in the state practice. How much it gets used is a question which keeps on oscillating between policy and practice, but this is the norm. So it is the police, and the police has an intersection with diversity, civic liberties, individual security, public order. So the police has to intersect with diversity, at the same time the normative context of civil liberties, at the same time the legally defined and highly prioritized individual security, and also highly prioritized public order in the society, which all fall in the basket of the police and policing. So the intersections are related to social life and culture. For the police, the social life and culture intersects with the law and police's own subculture. So there is social life and its culture, there is law, and there is police and its own subculture. So the intersections now are watered down to this particular makeup of things. So if I go ahead with this, the social life and culture affect expressions of culture within the democracy, liberal laws, rights, voices of the people, and freedom of expression. So the social life and culture is finding expression through the democracy, which informs most of the lived experience of the people. Liberal laws, constitution is a protector of those laws, and there are a number of laws on civic liberties which exist. A rights language and a rights practice, a rights rhetoric and a rights normative context which exists in the society, in the activism. Voices and freedom of expression with a free press. So the religious, there are now some culture related issues. First is religion, majority, minority. There is a majority religion of Hinduism, and there are minority religions. The country has got highest number of Hindus in the country. So the Hindu religion is a majority religion, but it doesn't have a status of a state religion. So, and minority rights and minority religious rights are very well protected by law and the constitution. So, just a minute. Yeah. So there are institutional safeguards to protect cultural identities, traditions of enjoyment of rights, tradition of conflict. So there is a tradition of enjoyment of right, and there is a tradition of conflict. That means the tradition of conflict is the large number of riots which have taken place in this country since past 100 years, and the whole partition of the country also happened through the identity based on religion. So the tradition of conflict is there. And so now the social life, the close proximity of majority and minority religion living together, close proximity of high caste and low caste living together, close proximity of the poor and the rich living together. So the close proximities are huge, and they do affect all other expressions of culture. So it helps in facilitating identity and culture, freedom of religion, freedom of worship, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. So these are the freedoms and rule of law. So the culture is there, the religious identities are there, cultural identities are there. There is a history of conflict, and then there is a legal order which provides for freedom of religion, worship, expression, assembly, and it all should transpire, or it all should be facilitated through rule of law. So this is the normative context in which you have to deliver. There are rules, regulations, norms. So the Indian polity, if we see, does affect the entire gamut of things. Indian polity is defined by its mass democracy, which is multi-party democracy. Vote weightage of the poor is very high. That means poor people are more in number, and their weightage in the electoral politics is high. Minority rights are a question mark. At times they make a difference, at times they don't. Caste, politics, and voices of Dalits, pressure groups. So caste has emerged as a pressure group. The difference in the caste and the politics around it, about the Dalits and the downtrodden, that also affects as a pressure group. Women as a pressure group is a question mark, but they increasingly find more voice, but it does exist. And local self-government. The local self-government part, I would especially like to emphasize, because my rest of the presentation would be on community policing, which is aligned to the local life of the people lived in villages and towns and cities. And local self-government with Panchayati Raj system in urban areas and rural areas, with two separate constitutional amendments, made a very big difference here. So this is the context of Indian politics, very briefly told. Now we come to the culture of policing and governance. So there are constraints because of this culture. This culture, very briefly summarized, has a colonial and historical disadvantage of having a very, very authoritarian, inegalitarian, undemocratic policing heritage, a heritage of riots. Of course, there is a heritage of riot prevention also, but there is a heritage of large number of riots, and in which sometimes the position of the police has also been questioned at many times and at many places through many commission reports. Politics of polarization is there because of religion and faith-based groups. History of terrorism and insurgency intersecting with religion, caste, and other tribal groups and other economic disadvantaged groups. So there is a history of terrorism and insurgency. Police subcultural issues. Now there are huge number of police subcultural issues in which right from abuse of human rights to corruption to lack of due process. A lot of those issues do exist. There is an active social media, and general media, which also sometimes get colored by certain influences of different cultural and social identities and political identities. Lack of trust from the minorities on the police, lack of general trust on the police, prejudices of the police towards the society and of the society towards the police. So these are the general constraints. Now there are certain advantages also, which the police, some good traits in the police culture. Culture of community orientation, which has come up over the years in certain jurisdictions. I'm not saying everywhere, but there are some very good practices, and these have not been very well documented. One of my tasks in my research is to document what I have personally seen, observed, and analyzed, and have also been subjected to other researchers doing it now. Legal and constitutional norms, which are very well defined for a very egalitarian, equity-based law enforcement. Non-reliance on disharmony, coercive policing. There are factors which affect non-coercive policing. Also, I have been seeing records in 1960s, 70s, 80s. There have been a lot of instruments designed by police circulars and some rules, regulations, which do talk about non-coercive policing and non-reliance on disharmony and reliance on communal harmony. So that is there is a normative context within the police on that. Freedom of expression and press, which keeps a check on police practices, and which is quite good because police, unbounded police powers or police abuse of authority gets checked by that. Rights awareness, accountability, local accountability. There are many problems. I'm not saying, but I'm right now uh, uh, concentrating on there are some good uh, uh, examples where this exists. Local democracy, again, as I told you, and capacity building. Capacity building, training, there are some very good examples on that also. So the community orientation standard setting. So there are three principles of democratic policing. The three basic principles are accountability, congruence, and community centricity. Uh, uh, so the community, this can be further explained through this diagram. Three pillars of democratic policing, that is accountability, congruence, and community centricity, which can be explained in this way. Accountability is the degree to which an organization subordinates itself to the authority of the state and the society. So whether the democratic principles of policing are utilized, and if they are utilized, they are very conducive for community policing to flourish. The second pillar is the community centricity. Community centricity is the degree to which the organization's achievement correspond to meet the needs of the society. So whether there is an overlap between what the organization thinks and what the community or the society expects, and the degree of congruence, whether there is a degree of congruence between what are the goals of the police and what are the expectations of the society. So this is the basic three pillars of community policing on which the community policing principles, which some of which I want to share, do exist. There are a lot of problems, and again I'm highlighting or flagging the problems because if you don't flag the problems, you can't appreciate the effort done. So the problems are public demand and state response, problems of law enforcement. There is huge activism in the country. You can see on every aspect of life in which there is a subordination or there is a compromise on law or liberties, people have raised voice. Some credible organizations have gone to the court, like my friend sitting in this Zoom talk is a very big champion of mainstreaming human rights and flagging gaps there. Issues of social structure, patriarchy, cultural sanctions, social authority, they do exist. Social, cultural, moral authority of individuals, of communities, primacy of domestic over legal. So these are also the problem. Individual liberty, legitimacy of law, cultural hegemony. These issues exist within a backdrop of democracy. So this makes the problem a bit more complex. Governance also becomes a bit more complex. Law enforcement itself becomes very challenging. Combating the public violence, cultural conflicts, religious conflicts. So there is a culture of public violence in the country. Religion and religious expression do result into violent mechanisms at times. Identities based on religion, but not only religion, caste, on particular community, on particular region, have also made a lot of difference to riots. There are a lot of issues in which public violence has resulted, apart from religion, from other sources of cultural identity. Then secularism. I have a separate slide on secularism. I'll deal with that, which is a normative context against these aberrations in the religious uh, um, chaos and violence. Social reforms. So these are the positive things which have come up over the years. So secularism has been a positive normative context which has really informed many practices. Social reform movements have a history of around 200 to 300 years old now. And like for gender-based rights, for different rights against discrimination based on caste and religion, all these have been taken up by social reform movements and have been very successful also. Equality, right, constitution. So equality and rights-based constitution is there, and progressive laws are there, which all have a counter to the culture of discrimination and violence. So there are riots, like this is a typical example of riot in which urban living conditions are very pathetic in slums and ghettos, and interface between two communities may bring frictions over very petty issues of day-to-day life. So it's not only that the religion issue is the only issue. The very conditions of life might also create a condition in which animosities between different cultural groups may increase. For example, abject poverty or very crammed up places to live, and there is a competition over the resources, and that may intersect with caste and religious identities, and this may produce a deep-seated kind of mistrust, which may lead to a culture of violence. So now, like with this backdrop, the religious freedoms exist in the Indian Constitution and in the Indian legal order. And since it exists in the Constitution and in the Indian legal order, it also exists in the law enforcement. To certain extent in some places, and not to certain extent in some places. So secularism, as defined and interpreted in the Indian context, is not that state is nothing to do with the religion, but state is equidistant state from all religions. So the state is not a religious, but it is equidistant from all religions. That means there is no state religion, but there is respect for all religions. That means enabling space for freedom of worship and religious expression. So the state is responsible to create an enabling environment for the exercise of freedom of worship and religious expression for all the religions. And definitely it includes minority religions also. Enabling environment and containing competing goals. So the enabling environment has to be created by the legal order and the law enforcement of that order, and containing competing goals. But the society exists, the 1.3 billion people society with multicultural caste community and cultural expressions, they lead to competing goals. So there are competing goals on which the different communities might exercise their rights or demand certain outcomes. And this is where the conflicts may rise. And this is where it comes to the police and the civic administration to deliver and to build peace and prevent conflict. So the religious conflicts now exist through this example. This diagram can be explained in this manner. There is a democratic space, this whole green thing. The upward arrow is culture, community and cultural rights, which goes up. Society and culture and religion, in which there are community and cultural rights. And there are rights, laws, and governance. And there is this another arrow on going. Another side is public order and peace. There are at times a conflict between the what community is demanding, and how both the communities or many communities demanding at the same time certain things, and it might become detrimental to public peace and order. And when it becomes detrimental to public peace and order because both the sides don't want to compromise and there is going to be a clash, and if there is a clash then there is a breakdown of public order, and when that happens then the police mandate is to maintain the public order, but at the same time police has the mandate to ensure religious freedoms and the non-infringement of religious freedoms, and if there are actors or acts or omissions related to compromising of religious rights or community rights, then the police has to act. So these are the like pulling apart from each other, both the things, and within this space, and this there is a democratic space. That means people have avenues to uh, voice their concerns. All kind of people have all kind of avenues to voice their concerns. So this is the space on which you have to apply your community policing principles. So the policing challenges are again like public rights and public order on the one side, and religion, culture, identity on the other. Sometimes they might not like contradict each other, but sometimes they do. So I'm giving this graphical representation of when they exist in opposition to each other. But it's not always that it happens like that. Now, there have been major community policing strategies in the country. One of the major ones have been investing in the community during normal times when there is no clash. And like, so there have been many states in which community policing principles have been applied. I'm particularly aware about Madhya Pradesh because it is the central Indian state in which I work, and also Maharashtra, which has mohalla committees, that means neighborhood watch committees. So in these committees, there are citizen peace committees, mohalla committees means neighborhood committees, small neighborhood, traffic warden system, bandobast samitis means event committees. When there are some religious events, then you have to maintain that and you get volunteers from the community to manage large crowds. And these are also coming from communities. Women's groups who like readily come forward to give help to the police to maintain large crowds of women for building up queues and other things like that. Rural Raksha Samiti in rural areas also there is a tradition. Particularly, I am aware of Madhya Pradesh. There are in every village a rural Raksha Samiti which takes care of burglary and all kind of crimes and many other insecurities. Student cadet program, which is in the state of Kerala, South India, it started and it is now burgeoning all over the country. College internship programs have been started, particularly in Madhya Pradesh. We have college so that you connect this youth with you. Victim support, self-help groups, sports initiatives for disadvantaged groups, educational camps for children, health camps and welfare camps, sanitation drives, area improvement drives, social campaigns, police station visits. These are some of the measures through which the police builds up a community outreach. These outreach reach build builds a kind of a interface with the community without any direct relationship with crime or criminality. It is just going to the community and meeting. So creating a space of dialogue with the community and improving transparency and improving access of the community towards the police. And this is the investment, because this kind of trust building measures later on pay when there are a lot of problems, there is conflict, and then these people who form different committees and community members, they come forward to help out, to negotiate with like conflicting groups, and they really partner with police to do that. And like in Madhya Pradesh, I have really seen a lot of this kind of thing happening. So there are issues like, for example, this picture shows conflict interfaith claiming on rights, there can be this kind of a huge crowd assembled, opposing crowds assembled face to face with each other, which can anytime turn into violence. And there is claim and counterclaims from the state and her agents. So there are claims and counterclaims being made uh, 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 for voicing their concerns. So the police authorities have the responsibility to listen to the delegations which come, the agitating groups which come, and give them a patient hearing and try to solve their problems out. There are conflicts between value-laden groups or between state agents and faith-based groups. So there can be value-laden groups are like caste groups can be a value-laden group, and religious groups can be a value-laden group. These value-laden groups might have grudges with each other. And sometimes these grudges may translate to the police because police is trying to prevent them to interact or to fight or to settle scores, and then the police becomes one of the parties. And so the police has to act very smartly to negotiate between the communities and build peace there. There are investing in community measures like reaching out and creating dialogues between police and community, facilitating inter-community forums, building trust among communities through constructive activities. So there, I listed some activities, but there are more activities. For example, in this picture, you can see like in the minority religion of Muslims, like these police officers are going to celebrate Eid or Ramadan with them, having like one-time meal with them, things like that, or going to this Aslam community and remaining with the children there and doing some sports drive there. So there are a lot of these kind of measures taken to help them out. And there are small meetings held regularly to mainstream these things. Apart from this, there are other um, measures like Shanti Samiti, Peace Committee, or Civic Office State invoking and investing in public stakes. So it is normatively essential for all district authorities to hold citizen committee meetings. These citizen committee meetings must take place every month, and members from all faith-based groups must be there to get involved with the issues concerning different communities, with festivals and other occasions. Street level contact and coalition and confidence building. So like the police officers must reach out to the different neighborhoods and ensure that if they go to a majority religious event, then they must go to a minority religious event also, to bring credibility to their job role and the perception of the people towards them. So the neutrality is very much important in trust building, and this is where senior officers have to intervene with the police officers to maintain that. Now, there are occasions where enforcement, altercation, or order management happen, facing the conflict, engagement, and negotiations. So these kind of events do take place. For example, I've been analyzing, doing an ethnographic study of a potential conflict happening because of two religious processions. One was on a Muslim festival of Muharram, and the other one was on Ganpati festival. In both the processions, there were thousands of people gathered, and they both wanted to enter same street at the same time because both the festival calendar coincided, and so there was competing demand to use the same road at the same time. And this town had a history of religious violence. And then how you mitigate that situation? You can't just beat them up and throw, like just chase them away. You have to maintain a balance so that both the communities are able to have their procession. At the same time, both the communities don't come across each other and fight or result in group clash. So you have to maintain the religious freedom of worship, so that they can have their own rituals. But at the same time, you have to maintain order and peace. And this is where these negotiations really help. Non-coercive policing measures, negotiation and engagement. And the negotiation and engagement would not happen if the police has not built trust with the communities. And the trust building activity cannot happen cosmetically just on the day of the event. It has to be from very time, like long time back, building up relationship with different kind of communities. There is a measure of planning and police action and modalities of policing, but it has to be supplemented by community interaction and negotiations, because only if you concentrate on planning and order making or controlling behavior, then it might result into coercive practices, because when the processions happen, the religious fervor is very high. The emotionally charged mobs can do anything to have their way. And they might not listen to this argument that let the other community come first, or like let us both go together. You'll have to have a series of meetings, a series of negotiations to effect that thing. And sometimes sudden actions can also happen. For example, a Muslim girl might run away with a Hindu boy and doesn't, like, against the will of the parents of both the and like then this marriage would in itself become a contentious issue between the two families. And this then the communities will take over, and they say that like you have like violated our daughter, or like things like that. And then these things also have resulted in many kind of riots. And so you have to have the pulse of the community, and this is where the very close observation of the community, having communicative channels with the community, as well as trust building activities, so that you can choose some volunteers in the community who build those bridges with the communities. And it does happen, like in this town of Vidisha, in which I've based my study. There have been 4 such occasions when the communities came face to face, but it didn't result in riot. Although there was a riot 2 years back, but it didn't result in riot in that particular time, because you built up a community negotiative platform, and that helped in creating a free flow of communication between the two. Another good example is the history of riots in Bombay. So the mega city of Bombay experienced major riots in 1984, and then in 92, 93, there was a major police commission which inquired and said that the police role was not good. But after that, from 93 onwards, Mumbai police invested in community policing a lot and established mohalla committees. Mohalla committees are small neighborhood committees. And these committees worked in the slum areas to build trust with Muslims as well as Hindu communities. And there have been many jolts on the communal front. There have been communal politics, many incidents, terrorist attack on the country, on that city. But after 93, there have been no riots till for 26 years. Otherwise, the frequency of riots was every 2 to 5 years. There was a riot in Bombay before that. But after that, it didn't happen, because this absorption of the tensions was done through community participation. And the community in itself felt that police is trying to just create peace in the society, and it's not against one community or the other. That kind of high trust level being built was something which is an outcome of community policing, very less documented, but it has been a source of support. So conflict prevention is basically investing in the cultural capital. So it's not like the police can become acultural, or it's just blindly follow the law. That is there, you have to follow the law or enforce the law, but you have to build bridges with the community, with the culture. You have to respect the culture, and if you respect the culture of each cultural group, those groups will come forward to help you out. And this is how in many instances we have seen. I'm doing the research on the central Indian state of Madhya Pradesh, but this example I have given is of Western Indian city, which is a different state. So it did make a difference there also. So wherever the practices have been like this, it has been successful. And there have been recent riots also, and the very police in those jurisdictions might not have followed these protocols, which are very well documented. There is a government policy now. In 2008, a government policy paper on communal harmony came up, which defines all these things. And there have been since 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, lot of documentation, lot of instruments have been created through law and through rule making. So the culturally embedded community policing addressing intersectional and multicultural issues of conflict generation has integrated efforts of civil society, NGOs, individuals, and the police. A very famous political scientist, Ashutosh Varshney, who writes on India, has written that an integrated civil society seems to have much greater uh, uh, potential for changing the behavior of the state than a critique that demands but is unable to procure such a change. So that's a very important thing, that an integrated civil society, and like that integration of the civil society has to be with a community oriented police, which also is brave enough to be accountable to the voices of the community. It's not coward to shy away and then come forward in coercive actions. I would call it more brave to be available to the community and remain accountable, rather than just sit behind your uh, uniform and try to act coercively, which is trying to avoid many things. So this is the major achievement which a community policing can measure can do. So this is all I have for today, and um, I hope mm, if you have some questions, I'm very, very willing to be available for that.